as we look and stare into the abyss. You never know what's staring back at you. It's coming.
All these voices.
We had tons of activity, including a demon attack that caused JC, the founder of Shadows Pit Paranormal, to puke all over the place, like projectile vomit. It was insane, and he got scratched on the neck. We captured a disembodied face that was screaming, and we also captured a couple different full-body apparitions, which was badass. Now, Baba Yaga was a Slavic witch, but she was also a supernatural guardian. And basically what she did was beat back the forces of evil from the realm of the dead, made a deal with a bunch of witches in the woods in Armenia. She sold her soul. And I am standing out here in the damn rain. I should have listened to my wife. She told me, if you're going out, bring an umbrella. I don't listen. Now I'm getting wet, so I'm sheltering underneath this tree. A nasty creature that I have actually had a run-in with myself. The bastard scratched the hell out of my car and jumped on. It was a mess. I tell the story in the show.
Are you watching? Getting a lot of activity. The spirit box is saying Satan, Paimon, and other major demons, and chanting and singing and whispering. We've never had that before. So you guys are going to have a great episode coming. The camera guy got attacked right now while we were talking. He got scratched. He said something scratched his back, and I looked at his back, and it's got a scratch on it, guys. There's the picture right there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. How's everybody tonight?
For those of you that have been with us for quite a while on this journey, you will know that here on Staring, we do multiple different kinds of shows. We have the standard paranormal type shows where we talk about ghosts and demons and stuff like that. We do monster shows where we talk about different creatures from folk legends and mythologies, whether or not they're real or not, give the information about them, that kind of thing. And we also do scientific shows like Flat Earth and Hollow Earth and all those kind of things. And we go through and we give all the information on that, and we tell you whether or not it's real. And we also do history shows. Now, we haven't done a history show in quite a while, but we've done some amazing history shows in the past. We did one on Billy the Kid. We did one on Manson. There's been all kinds of cool history shows that we did. But it's been a long, long time. And I kind of wanted to do another one of those. We haven't done one in a while, but I wanted to do something that hasn't really been done before. I wanted to do something that most people don't know the story and probably have never even heard of the story. Now, this is not going to be a paranormal show. There's no ghosts, there's no goblins, there's no witches, there's none of that. But it's an extremely interesting show, and it kind of has a lesson that pertains to today. So this show is going to be on the Greenwood Massacre. It was also known as the Tulsa Race Riots. Now, this took place in 1921, from May 31st to June 1st of 1921. Basically, what happened was you had these mobs of the white residents of the town, and then you had the black residents of the town, and they kind of went head-to-head. It was probably the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. I mean, it was an all-out war that took place in this town. There was fighting on the ground. There was even fighting from the air. It was an amazing story. And at the end of it, there was more than 35 square blocks of the city that was just completely destroyed and burnt down. Now, the section that was burnt down was, at the time that it happened, it was the wealthiest black community in the United States. It was actually called the Black Wall Street. During this, more than 800 people were admitted to the hospital, and more than 6,000 of the black residents of the town were arrested and detained, most of them for multiple days. The Oklahoma Bureau of Vital Statistics, they officially recorded 36 deaths, but there's all kinds of numbers that have been given out for the actual death toll. The official number is 36. They re-examined this. A state commission re-examined these events in 2001. And according to its report, They estimated the death count between 100 and 300 people were killed in the rioting. So the riot began over the Memorial Day weekend. And what happened was a 19-year-old named Dick Rowland, who was a black shoeshine guy. He was accused of assaulting Sarah Page. Now, Sarah Page was the 17-year-old white elevator operator, and she worked in the Drexel building that was close to where Dick Rowland shined shoes. So he ended up getting taken into custody, and a bunch of the white people showed up outside the courthouse where he was being held, and they tried to lynch him, basically. Well, the black people found out, and they showed up to the courthouse to protect him, and they brought their guns. Shots ended up getting fired, and 12 people were killed then, 10 black people, 2 white people. As people began to hear about what had happened, and that people had been killed, business really picked up. You had thousands of white people rampaging through the black neighborhood that night and the next day. And they were killing men and women. They were burning and looting the stores and burning the homes. There was about 10,000 black people at the end of this that were left homeless. And the property damage amounted to more than $1.5 million in real estate and $750,000 in personal property. Now remember, that's 1921 money. If you turn that into 2019 money, in today's money, that would be $32 million in damages. Many of the black survivors completely left Tulsa after this. But the people that stayed, the black and the white residents that stayed in the city, they pretty much just shut up about this and tried to cover it up for decades. It was not talked about in the local or the state history. Even nationally, nobody was talking about this. It's not in history books. It's not taught in classrooms. And people just kind of, for the most part, forgot this ever happened. In 1996, 75 years after the riot had happened, there was a bipartisan group in the state legislature of Oklahoma that formed a commission to study this race riot that happened in 1921. So they investigated it, they interviewed some of the survivors that were still alive, they heard testimony from them, and they made a report. We're going to be talking a little bit about the report and some of the stuff that they found out to kind of give the events of what happened. First of all, this was 1921. And in 1921 in Oklahoma, it was a completely different world than it is today. World War I had ended in 1918, and you had a lot of soldiers that came back. The American Civil War ended in 1865, but there was still people alive that remembered it. The Civil Rights Movement hadn't happened. There was still segregation. Black people were not allowed to eat in the same places that white people were allowed to eat. They weren't allowed to use the same bathrooms, the same drinking fountains, that kind of thing. The Ku Klux Klan had come and gone and come again. This was during a time when the Ku Klux Klan was really coming back into power. Now, Tulsa at that time was a booming oil city, and they had a very large number of rich, educated people. And they also had one of the highest numbers in the entire country of professional African Americans. So these are not like normal people that go to a 9-to-5 job. These are business owners. These are entrepreneurs. These are people that are doing their own thing. They're making their own businesses. They're creating wealth. They're creating jobs for their community. Now, this combination of factors, all of these things played a part in the tensions that began to rise and ultimately ended up becoming this insane riot that happened. Oklahoma first became a state, I believe it was in 1907, and at that time the state legislature passed the racial segregation laws. A lot of people know those as the Jim Crow laws. That was the first thing they did. Now, the 1907 Oklahoma Constitution did not call for segregation because the delegates were afraid that if they included it, Theodore Roosevelt, who was president at the time, would veto the document. So instead, the very first law that was passed by the new legislature was for segregation. It segregated all railroad travel, voter registration. They made a lot of rules for voter registration where it was almost impossible for a black person to vote. Now, that also meant because they weren't able to register, it meant that they could not serve as jurors. They couldn't be on a jury, and they couldn't hold political office. Now, this actually kept on going long after this riot. It went all the way up until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, in the early 20th century, lynchings were fairly common in Oklahoma. Now, you had that for white people lynching black people, obviously. That's what you think of when you think of lynching. But another aspect of this that was extremely popular in Oklahoma at the time was lynch mobs, mob justice. So you have a criminal that commits a crime, and the people decide they don't want to wait for a judge to decide or a jury to decide whether this guy's guilty or not and punish him. They decide he's guilty, they're going to string him up right there. Now, this happened to black people, but it also happened to white people, every kind of person that there was that happened to, because they wanted to make sure that that person paid for whatever they did. So between when Oklahoma became a state and when the riot happened, which was 13 years later, there were at least 31 people that were lynched in Oklahoma. During the 20 years after this riot, the number of lynchings in the whole state was only 2. On August 4th of 1916, Tulsa passed an ordinance that mandated residential segregation. It forbidded black people from residing on any block where 3/4 or more of the residents were white. And it also forbid whites from residing on any block where 3/4 of the residents were black. The United States Supreme Court declared that that was unconstitutional. That happened the following year. But Tulsa and many of the other southern cities and border cities did it anyway. They still did segregation anyway for another 3 decades. They didn't care. So as returning veterans were coming back from war and trying to re-enter the labor market, there was a lot of tension there because you had these people coming back and they wanted their jobs, but those jobs had already been filled. So you had a lot of social tensions, you had a lot of anti-black sentiment, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-anybody but them sentiment, basically. At the same time, you had black people, black men, that had served the country in World War I and fought. And they had come back, and they were trying to get their civil rights because they didn't think it was fair that they went and fought, and a lot of them died fighting a war for our country, and they came back and they weren't even allowed to drink out of the same fountain as the white people were. They thought that was kind of wrong. And frankly, I have to agree with them. That's kind of messed up. You know, they're willing to go and fight and die, and we won't even let them eat at the same counter. It's stupid. So all of this stuff was going on. That caused a lot of tension anyway. That was the backdrop to where this thing happens in. So during this time is when the events that started these riots took place. I know that was a whole lot of information, but I wanted you to have an understanding of what Tulsa was like at that time, what Oklahoma was like at that time, what things led up to this that caused everybody to kind of be on edge anyway. So it is alleged that at some time around 4 p.m., Dick Rowland, the 19-year-old shoeshine boy, entered the elevator of the Drexel building. Now, there's only one elevator in that building, and he had to go into that elevator multiple times a day because that was the closest bathroom that he was allowed to use. He wasn't allowed to use the normal bathroom with the whites. He had to go to the blacks only bathroom, and that was located on the top floor of the Drexel building. So he had to go multiple times a day into that building, into that elevator, ride up that elevator, go to that bathroom. While he was in the elevator, he encountered Sarah Page. She was the 70-year-old white elevator operator that was working the elevator. The two of them probably knew each other. I would say it's very, very likely that they knew each other. At least they knew by sight each other. They knew what each other looked like. They knew who each other were. Because like I said, he was in this elevator quite a lot because he had to go up to go to the bathroom, and she worked that elevator. So it's pretty likely that they knew who each other were. A clerk at Renberg's, which was a clothing store that was on the first floor of the Drexel building, that clerk said that they heard a sound, and it sounded like a woman's scream. And they went to investigate, and they saw a young black man running out of the building. The clerk went over to the elevator and found Paige in what he said was a distraught state. So she was upset. He thought that she had been assaulted, so he called the cops. The 2001 Oklahoma Commission report said that it was unusual for both Rowland and Paige to be working downtown on Memorial Day because most of the stores and the businesses would have been closed. It also suggested that Rowland simply had an accident, like he slipped and fell maybe, tripped or something, and landed against the girl or caught himself using her or something like that. Or maybe they had an argument or something like that and he got scared and ran. Now there's also a little bit of drama involved in this because there's speculation here. A lot of historians and a lot of people on that commission and a lot of people at the time speculated that Dick and Sarah knew each other. They also kind of said that, well, let's say they also said that he was a regular in that elevator, so they knew each other, and they said that they probably knew each other very, very well. There's even speculation that they might have been lovers. Now, had that been the case, that's a very, very dangerous situation, because that's not accepted back then. Black people couldn't even drink from the same fountain. What do you think was going to happen if they were in a relationship with a white woman? So maybe it was a lover's quarrel, and she got mad and screamed, and he took off because he knows what happens when a white woman screams at that time. You're in trouble. You got to get the hell out of there. Maybe that's what happened. That's what the speculation is. I don't know. I wasn't there. I have no idea what happened. I just know what has been reported. It is clear that both Dick Rowland and Sarah Page were downtown on Monday, May 30th, 1921. It's kind of weird because most of the businesses were closed, but they were there. Another thing that we are pretty sure of, because a whole lot of people that actually knew Dick Rowland, both white and black, they all agree on one thing, and that is that he was never capable of rape. It just wasn't in him. He wasn't going to be that kind of person to rape or to assault a woman in any way. The police questioned Page, Sarah Page, but there was no written account of her statement found. So it's not on record anywhere, her statement to the police. It is generally accepted that the police decided that what happened between the two was not an assault. They basically said there was nothing there. And Sarah Page told the police that she was not going to press charges. Now you would think, well, that's great. That means he's in the clear. No problem, right? But remember, 1921, Oklahoma, not a good situation for the guy. He knew it wasn't good. So he tried to leave. He tried to run away. He fled to his mother's house in Greenwood, which is still in Tulsa, but it was deep in the black neighborhood. So on the 3rd of June, the Morning Tulsa Daily World, which was a newspaper, reported the major points of an interview they did with the deputy sheriff, Barney Cleaver, about these events. Cleaver was a deputy sheriff for Okmulgee County, and being a sheriff, he didn't work for the police. He had his own thing going. A sheriff is above the police. He's an elected official by the public, so he doesn't answer to the police. His main duties were to enforce the law among the quote-unquote colored people, that's what he says, of Greenwood, and he also was a private investigator. He had his own business as a private investigator. He had been dismissed as a city police investigator in the past because he assisted county officers with a drug raid at Gurley's Hotel, but he never reported to his superiors that he was helping out. So they kicked him out. He had a whole lot of land holdings, and the riot really, really hurt this guy. He lost a lot during this riot. Among his holdings were several residential properties and a place called Cleaver Hall. Now, Cleaver Hall was a large community gathering place and function hall. He personally evicted a bunch of armed criminals who had barricaded themselves within some of the properties he owned, and once he kicked them out, they just moved over to Cleaver Hall. This is where a lot of the violence took place. The Morning Tulsa Daily World stated that Cleaver named Will Robinson a dope peddler and an all-around bad Negro as the leader of the armed blacks. He has also the names of 3 others who were in the armed gang at the courthouse. The rest of these Negroes participating in this fight, he says, were former servicemen who had an exaggerated idea of their own importance. They did not belong here, had no regular employment, and were simply a floating element with seemingly no ambition in life but to foment trouble. End quote. O.W. Gurley, the owner of the Gurley's Hotel, identified the following men by name as arming himself in the hotel. He said it was Will Robinson, Peg Leg Taylor, Bud Bassett, Henry Van Dyke, Chester Ross, Jake Mays, O.B. Mann, John Supplesocks, guy simply known as Fatty, that's kind of interesting, Jack Scott, Lee Mabel, John Bowman, and W.S. Weaver. So that's what the paper had to say. On the morning after the incident took place, Detective Henry Carmichael and Henry C. Pack, who was a black patrolman, found Rowland on Greenwood Avenue, and they arrested him. Pack was one of the 2 black officers on the city's police force. The police force at that time had, I think, 45 people, if I remember correctly. Initially, they took Rowland to the Tulsa City Jail, but later that day, the police commissioner, Commissioner Atkinson, said that he received an anonymous telephone call. There was a death threat on Rowland. So because there had been a threat that they were going to come kill this kid, he ordered Roland transferred to a more secure jail on the top floor of the courthouse. Now, Roland was well known among the attorneys and the other legal people within the city because a lot of them were customers of his. They came down and he shined their shoes. And a lot of witnesses reported later after these events that several of the attorneys actually defended Roland in conversations they were having with one another. And they were saying, that they knew him, they've known him for a long, long time, and that he's not that kind of person. There's no way he did this, that it's not true. That was something said by multiple of the city officials and the attorneys that worked in the area that were his customers. The Tulsa Tribune broke a story in that afternoon's edition, and the headline was, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in an elevator." Now that's the headline. So right there in the headline they're telling you, go get this guy because he attacked a girl in an elevator. It actually had a little warning in the article, a little editorial warning. The little editorial warning was titled, "To Lynch Negro Tonight." So by those headlines you can tell that everybody knew exactly what was getting ready to happen. That edition of the Tribune hit the streets about 3 p.m. By 4 p.m., it had spread everywhere that there was going to be a lynching, that these people were going to go down and get this kid and string him up. So by 4, all the local authorities were on alert. They were starting to barricade the area. They were starting to put people in place to stop the lynching from happening. The people that wanted to do the lynching, the white people that wanted to lynch him, started to gather near the courthouse. By sunset around 7:30, there were several hundred white people assembled outside of the courthouse. And it was a little tiny lynch mob started, and more people kept coming. The sheriff, Willard McCulloch, didn't want this to happen. He took steps to try to ensure the safety of Roland. He organized his deputies into a defensive formation around Roland upstairs, and he actually gave orders that anybody that came up those stairs trying to get Roland was to be shot on sight. And then he positioned 6 of his men with rifles and shotguns on the roof in case people started storming the building so they could start shooting people. He turned the elevator off in the building, and the rest of his men he put in front of the stairs so nobody could even get there. Then the sheriff went outside and he tried to convince the crowd to go home, but they weren't having it. About 8:30 p.m., 3 white men walked into the courthouse demanding that Roland be turned over to them. The sheriff told him to go to hell. Get out of here, you're not getting him. While this is going on, a few blocks away on Greenwood Avenue, members of the black community and some known criminals that ran underground gambling houses were having a meeting. And they were trying to figure out what they were going to do about this. They decide that they need to go down and help this kid. They got to protect him. So you had a lot of these young World War I vets that were among these people. And they started preparing for battle. They started gathering up their guns and their ammunition and making plans to go down there and fight if need be to protect this kid. At 9:30 p.m., a group of around 50 to 60 black men armed with rifles and shotguns show up at the courthouse to try to support the sheriff and his deputies and defend Roland from the mob. Now, they said that the sheriff had asked them to come. They were just following the orders of the sheriff. He asked them to come there and help him to defend Roland. This was corroborated by at least 10 witnesses. The sheriff denied that he gave those orders. He said he did not do it. But it was corroborated by 10 witnesses. This is what the sheriff said, quote, "I saw a car full of Negroes driving through the streets with guns. I saw Bill McCullough and told him those Negroes would cause trouble. McCullough tried to talk to them, and they got out and stood in single file. W.G. Daggs was killed near Boulder and 6th Street. I was under the impression that a man with authority could have stopped and disarmed them. I saw Chief of Police on south side of courthouse on top step talking. I did not see any officer except the chief. I walked in the courthouse and met McCullough in about 15 feet of the door. I told him these Negroes were going to make trouble, and he said he had told them to go home. He went out and told the whites to go home, and one said, they said you told them to come up here. McCullough said, I did not. And a Negro said, you did tell us to come. End quote. Now, seeing this group of armed black people show up, a lot of the white people in the crowd went home and got their guns and came back. Some of the white people headed to the National Guard Armory. They were going to get guns from the armory to bring back. Major James Bell of the 180th Infantry had already been told about what was going on downtown and to watch out because people might be coming to the armory to try to break in and take guns. So he called the commanders of 3 National Guard units in Tulsa, who ordered all of the Guard members to put on their uniforms and go to the armory. When the group of white people showed up at the armory, they began pulling at the bars and the grating and banging on the door and trying to get in. Bell opened the door and went outside and confronted them. And it was, at the time, 300 to 400 people outside trying to break into the armory. And he went out there by himself. And he told them that the National Guard members were inside and that they were armed and they would shoot anybody who walked through the door. The crowd didn't want any part of that, so they just turned around and left. Back at the courthouse, the crowd had grown to about 2,000 people, most of them now armed. Several of the local leaders, including a reverend and different city leaders, tried to convince the mob to go away. They tried to talk to both sides and calm it down and make everybody go home, but nobody was listening. The tension kept rising. People were getting more and more upset, more and more angry, and it was more likely that something was going to happen. Many of the blacks were worried at this point about the safety of Roland because it was obvious that the lynch mob was going to go in there and get him if they could. So some of them started riding around, little small groups of armed black men riding around in automobiles, riding around the courthouse. They did that partly for reconnaissance purposes to see, what all was going on and report back, and also as a show of force. A lot of the white people in the mob interpreted these actions as a, quote, Negro uprising, and they got a little concerned about it. At some point during this, there was a gunshot. A lot of the eyewitnesses say they think that it was somebody firing a gun into the air, but they're not sure. And this led to a lot more panic. While this all was going on, back in Greenwood, the rumor mill is going. People are talking about what's going on. They're saying there's like thousands of white people and they're going to storm the thing and kill this kid, and the people that showed up to try to protect him, they're going to get killed. So around 10 p.m., 75 more armed black men go to the courthouse. And they offer to help the sheriff, and he declines their help, but they stick around. At this point, according to the witnesses, there was a white guy that told one of the armed black men to give up his pistol. The black man refused, and a gunshot rang out. It could have been a warning shot. It could have been that he was trying to shoot the dude. Either way, that kicked everything off. That gunshot triggered an almost immediate response, because as soon as that gunshot went off, the majority of the white people in the crowd opened fire on the crowd of black people. When they got fired upon, the black people fired back at the white people. So then everybody's shooting at everybody. This was the first battle of this little war here. And it only lasted a handful of seconds. But in those handful of seconds, 10 white people and 2 black people died. They were killed. The group of black men retreated back towards Greenwood. The white people chased them, and they were shooting back and forth the whole way. So you had a lot of little skirmishes and little battles taking place. Around 11 p.m., the Oklahoma National Guard unit began to assemble at the armory and come up with a plan to try to stop the riot. They sent several groups downtown to set up guard at the courthouse and the police station and other public sites to make sure nothing got damaged. Members of the local American Legion actually went on patrol on the streets. The forces appear to have been deployed to protect the white districts that were close to Greenwood, and the National Guard began rounding up all the black people that they saw and taking them to the convention hall on Brady Street for detention. You also had a lot of very prominent participators in this riot. One of them was the founder of Tulsa and a KKK member named W. Tate Brady, who was a night watchman. According to a report in a publication called This Land Press, Brady led a tarring and feathering rampage on a group of men. The article states that the police delivered the convicted men into the custody of the Black Robe Knights of Liberty. Basically, the cops gave them to these dudes and they tarred and feathered them, is basically what happened. So what you had going on here is you had the police and a lot of the officials kind of working with the lynch mob at this point, going after the black population. So you had multiple different skirmishes that were taking place, multiple different attacks that were taking place. here and there. As the mob got closer to Greenwood, it reached all of the black businesses there, and it began looting and burning them to the ground. Once they finished with the businesses, they made their way into the communities where all the black people lived, and they began bursting into homes, rounding up the black people, and sending them with the cops to be detained at the convention center. Anybody who did not go willingly was beaten or shot, and then they burned their houses down, a lot of them. Now, while this is going on, a lot of the people that lived in Greenwood, the black people, they fled. They got the hell out of Dodge. They saw what was coming, they knew it was bad news, and they ran for it. The ones that didn't, a lot of them got detained, or beaten severely and then detained. At around midnight, some of the white rioters went back to the courthouse. This was a smaller group than before, but they wanted to lynch this guy, and they tried to storm the building. The sheriff and his deputies turned them away, and they got them to disperse through shooting and stuff like that. So throughout the early morning hours, there were all these gunfights that were still going on, and a rumor started being circulated among the mob that there was a train coming from Muskogee that was going to be full of black people that were armed to the teeth, and it was going to be an invasion of Tulsa. This is the rumor that's circulating. So now everybody's freaking out thinking, oh my God, there's a whole trainload of black people coming to kill us. So at that point, a train actually comes in. And the people on the train actually had to dive for cover and lay on the ground because the mob opened fire on the train, thinking it was a train full of armed black people coming to kill them. And they opened fire on the train, and luckily nobody was killed, but the people had to take cover. So around 1 a.m., the mob began setting those fires I was talking about. It started in the commercial district and made its way into the communities. As the fires are burning, the fire department shows up to try to put out these fires. And the mob starts shooting at the firemen. Now, no firemen were ever hit or killed during this. So I don't think they were actually shooting at them. I think they were just shooting warning shots to get them to run away. So the fire department was not able to put out these fires because every time they would try, the mob would show up and start shooting. So they'd run away. Coincidentally, the National Guard was no help here. You would think that the National Guard would have ensured that the firefighters could do their job, but I don't think that they wanted to. That's just my opinion. This news traveled among the residents of Greenwood, the black residents, and some of them decided that they weren't going to run away, that they were going to try to take up arms and defend their neighborhoods. So this led to a lot more fighting going on sporadically through the night. Around 5 a.m., the sun came up, and there was a train whistle that sounded. Some of the rioters believed that this sound was a signal for them to launch the all-out assault on Greenwood. They thought they were being signaled to do an all-out assault on the black neighborhood. So they did. They just ran in. Now, the black residents of Greenwood, remember, some of these guys fought in the army. So you had some of them that were snipers. And so they were sitting back and picking these guys off as they were come running. It was actually a group of 5 white men that were in a car that led the charge, and they were all killed by snipers before they had even got 1 block. But overwhelmed by the sheer number of the white people, basically the black people had to turn and run. And this led to mass chaos as the residents fled for their lives in fear, and rioters started shooting anybody they saw and killing people and burning things, and it was not a good scene. So another rumor began to spread among the white people that the Mount Zion Baptist Church was being used as a fortress, and that supposedly there were these 20 caskets full of rifles that had been delivered to the church. Now, there was no evidence of that, but they went and burned the place down. Now, that's not even the craziest part. There was also attacks that happened by air. Numerous eyewitnesses described airplanes being flown by white people who fired rifles and dropped firebombs on buildings, homes, and fleeing families. These aircraft were privately owned. They were sent from the nearby Curtis Southwest Field that's right outside of Tulsa. The law enforcement said that those planes were strictly for reconnaissance and to protect against what they said, quote, a Negro uprising. There were law enforcement officials on some of the flights. But the eyewitness accounts say a different thing. They're saying that they were what's called turpentine balls, which were these large balls soaked in turpentine and lit on fire that were dropped down, and they caused one hell of a mess and fire. That's what the eyewitnesses reported seeing. So this all came to a close when the main contingent of National Guard troops arrived. General Charles Barrett of the Oklahoma National Guard arrived with 109 troops that came from Oklahoma by train around 9:15 in the morning. He was sent in by the governor. Now, he could not legally do anything until he had contacted all of the appropriate local authorities, including the mayor, the sheriff, police chief, like that. So his troops went to eat breakfast. By this time, thousands of the surviving black residents had already fled. Another 4,000 people had been rounded up and detained at various different places in the city. So once they had contacted all the officials, they declared martial law. And they required that all the detainees had identification cards so that everybody knew who they were. Barrett declared martial law at 11:49 a.m. And by noon, the troops had managed to suppress most of the remaining violence. So that's what ended up ending this whole thing. The National Guard came in and they declared martial law and they put a stop to it. Now, the interesting thing about this is no white people whatsoever were charged, ever, with anything for the riot. A whole bunch of the black people were detained, but after the riots were over, they were sent home. And everybody just kind of tried to pretend that this didn't happen at all, which was amazing. That something this large, I mean, you had a big section, 35 blocks of the city were burnt down. A lot of people were killed or wounded or hurt. The official total was 36, but as I've went through this report and described it to you, I'm sure you see it had to have been more than that. You don't have this kind of fighting back and forth and gunfire and burning and beatings and all this stuff that's taking place without more than 36 people getting killed. So that is what happened. And that is an insane story, and everybody just tried to forget it like it never happened. It was left out of history books. Nobody talked about it until it was brought back up a long time later. Now, this kind of pertains a little bit to today as well, because it kind of shows what happens when things get out of control. Here you had the media fanning the flames that already existed. There was already tension there. And the media was kind of egging it on with those headlines and those sensational stories, basically telling people to go lynch this kid. So then you had two armed groups that showed up, head to head. We've seen a lot of that in the different protests that have been happening, where you have one group and the other group, and they kind of start getting into clashes, and there's fists thrown and stabbings and people hit with locks and all kinds of crazy stuff. This stuff can get out of hand really easy. So I thought this was an important one to bring out and to do a show on, to kind of show what happened in the past. Nothing like that's happened yet here in the present, thankfully, but you never know. I mean, we had those LA riots, and I'm sure Old Boy can talk about that. Those LA riots that happened in LA during the Rodney King thing, that got way out of control, and a lot of people got hurt. And so it can easily get out of control. But with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I'm going to throw over to Old Boy and get his opinions on this.
Thank you, James. This sounds like a clear case of blown out of proportion, instigating by the news. Guy, here's what my opinion is on this. The girl and the guy were messing around. Something happened, they got in an argument. The girl screamed at him or something. And then the guy over-exaggerated who caught it. Or, here's another theory I have, was jealous because it was a white girl and an African-American man that were messing around back, like he said, in the 20s. That didn't happen. That was in certain, especially in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So what probably happened is he was either irritated or liked the girl, or he just didn't. He was racist, and that's probably both of them, to what I'm thinking. So what happened is it got blown out. People instigated. The news, like always, blows everything out of proportion. You know, everybody knows that. And if you believe about 85% of the news is lies anyway, exaggerates. So just remember that, guys. Don't always believe everything you hear, especially on the internet and stuff like this. But this is a clear case that people didn't really know what was going on, making up stories, instigating things, making up lies, trying to get this poor guy to the point where they had to hide him up in a building up 3-4 stories or what. I don't know how big this building was, but up in there, the police department, to the point where they had to guard it. They got all these people crazed, and a lot of, like he was saying, a lot of these white guys were bigots and KKK members. And then you had some African Americans who were like doing. He was saying it was trying to defend the guy. It doesn't matter if the sheriff did or called him or not. They came to defend the guy because they couldn't let this young kid get murdered for probably nothing. It got blown out of proportion, especially back then. And look what happened: a riot, people got killed. You know, they made these assumptions, started shooting at trains, trying to kill people that had probably nothing to do with this. And imagine if you were on this train, you're coming in, and all of a sudden a bunch of white people start shooting at you. That would probably scare the hell out of most people. And might have, I don't know, if somebody got killed. I don't know if what happened with that. But it could just seems like this whole story was, point is what I think James is telling you is what goes on now. That people still, to this day, don't find out the facts. They just jump. And they do things on a whim. Even, and maybe this was factual. The girl said it. She didn't press charges. And nothing was that. But people don't care. If you hate somebody so much, and that back then, a lot of whites hate a lot of African Americans, and probably vice versa. And it just escalated to that. It escalated to the point where they were lost control, riot around. And of course, they forgot about it because they were all embarrassed of it. Because come to find out, it was probably probably found out the truth. This guy was telling the truth, and most people, like you said, it was originally a couple people. Then it blew up because most people copy. What they do is most people wait around for a little crowd, like 20, 30 people. Then it comes 30, 40 people. Then it comes 100, 200. Then everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon like they do with everything. So, oh yeah, well, now you got 2,000 people out there. Most of these people probably didn't know what was going on, and some of these people were Ku Klux Klan members at the time and just didn't like blacks, and they wanted to kill the kid because that's what they did, especially back in the 20s. And back then, they probably the African Americans got fed up with it, and then went over there to defend it. You know, they had some gangbangers, and well, I wouldn't say gangbangers, but you know, there was pimps and hustlers and drug sellers, whatever, and regular African American workers that just got tired of it and fed up, and they tried to defend this kid, but they were outnumbered. I mean, back then there was probably more whites then, and they had no chance. I mean, nothing to do. But then, you know, then here comes the paranoia. Oh, there's a whole bunch of African Americans coming in a train. You know, and they start shooting up a train, and they're making up all these stories. They were trying to go into the military to steal weapons, and that's actually good that they stopped them, because if they didn't, they would have ended up getting themselves with machine guns, and it would have been a problem then, because you ain't going to stop thousands of people with those kind of weapons. And it doesn't matter how many people you had defending it. At that time, you had handguns and shotguns and rifles back in the 20s. You had revolvers. You didn't have like you do now. It's different. If you got a hold of military weapons, you're going to do some damage. Unless the military came in and stopped this. And luckily they did at the end, and they rounded up. They didn't arrest any whites. No surprise there. And why they let go at the African Americans, because they didn't want this coming out and other people knowing it, so they forgot about it. And now somebody went back in history and brought it back up. No surprise there either. but like I said, the history always comes back. It'll some way to find out. It'll come maybe 40, 50 years later. It came out back because somebody always finds out something. And if you look at it the way I look at it, it seems the same thing. The girl was probably with the guy. They probably had an argument. The guy there got mad or wanted to instigate it. Maybe he probably didn't like African Americans. He's probably a part of that group or friends with them or acquainted with them. They were all friends, just because you weren't in the Ku Klux Klan, you were probably affiliated with them or friends with them, and you gave them deals and stuff. So that's probably what happened. So at the end, it's pretty much the truth. You can't always believe everything you hear because of somebody saying something. Find facts out. Don't listen to what people say because they have their own agendas. They hate that person in the first place. They're not going to say anything good. Doesn't matter if the truth's there, they'll twist it and try to make it look like it's a lie. And everybody does that. Majority of people do that. 95% of people do that. So that's the point of this story. And people are going to say, well, why aren't you guys doing, you're going to be about ghosts? No, we do history too. We don't just do ghost crypto. We do history, and this is the one we haven't done for a while. That's why we're doing history, because we haven't done a history for a while. And this is actually a pretty good story, and I actually enjoyed it. It just was really interesting to me. So I hope you guys have a good night. Go ahead, James.
See, keep in mind, this is 1921. This is at the end of Woodrow Wilson's presidency. That's important because this is the heyday of the Ku Klux Klan. This is when the Klan had the most members that it had ever had, even more than right after the Civil War when it was first founded by the Southern Democrats. There was more Klan members at this time than ever. Woodrow Wilson had Klan members come to the White House, and he showed the film A Birth of a Nation, which was a Ku Klux Klan film glorifying the Klan in the White House. So this is the environment that this is taking place in. The reason that's important is because that tells you a lot about the feelings that were going on at that time, about the tension that was taking place even before the encounter between Dick Rowland and Sarah Page. It shows you that there was a lot of tension there and what was taking place and how big the Klan was at that time. People talk about the Klan nowadays, but the Klan nowadays is nothing. It's very small, it's very isolated, and it's filled with just a couple extremes. It's not white people anymore. But at that time, there were millions of Klan members. It was a lot of people. Just thought I'd throw that in because that's kind of important to know. This is one of those stories that is very important. It's also very uncomfortable, to be quite honest. Not everybody wants to hear this kind of stuff. You're automatically going to want to jump on one side or the other in your mind. You're going to feel uncomfortable whether you're white or you're black. You're going to feel uncomfortable. If you're white, you're going to feel uncomfortable because you're going to be like, man, that sucks that white people did that. That makes me feel bad, because I'm not like that. And if you're black, you're going to be like, man, that's messed up. You're going to be upset about this, which you should be because it was messed up. So the natural instinct is to take one side or the other, or to try to do exactly what these people did after this event took place, which is try to forget it, just bury it, like it didn't even happen, because it's uncomfortable. You don't want to talk about this, so let's put it away. But that's exactly what we should not do, because everybody's heard that old saying, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. It's important to know our history. It's important to study this stuff and to discuss it as rational human beings and learn from it. That's why I think it's absolutely insane to tear down the Confederate monuments and to try to erase all of that Confederate history. It's not because it glorifies the South or glorifies the Civil War or slavery or any of that nonsense that you hear. Those are important reminders. We can't sanitize history, because if we don't know what happened in the past, then we don't know the lessons that we learned from what happened in the past, and we're doomed to repeat those same dumb mistakes again. See, one thing when you study history you learn is history is cyclical. It repeats over and over and over again. The problem is people don't learn from the mistakes because people don't have a proper understanding and respect for history. This stuff is important. It's uncomfortable, but it's important. Personally, I think that for the most part, we've moved past this as a nation. Now, if you listen to the news, that's not what you're going to hear. You're going to hear that, oh, it's so racist everywhere, but that's nonsense. I live in Virginia, the heart of the Confederacy. I live in the mountains in a very, very small town in Virginia. I don't even know anybody who's racist. And that's the God's honest truth. Not a single person I know. And I know a whole bunch of good old boys. A whole bunch of mountain folk and country boys and rednecks. That's my people. I don't know anybody who's racist. I see a lot of these white rednecks riding around in their pickup trucks, listening to rap music and stuff like that, man. It's that world that they try to create in the media doesn't actually exist anymore. There are small pockets of idiots out there on both sides that are still hateful. But that's not either one of us. That's not white people and that's not black people anymore. That hatred is a thing of the past, and we should leave it in the past. Don't forget about it. Learn those lessons. But the lesson that should have been learned from all of this is not to do that again. We're supposed to love each other. Like I said, I'm a redneck from the South. I'm a mountain man. I am a descendant of Robert E. Lee. He is one of my ancestors on one side of my family. And I'm telling you right now, I don't give a damn if you're black, white, green, yellow, pink. I don't care. It does not make a bit of difference to me. Because we are all called to love each other. That is the lesson I think that we should take from this. And that's the lesson that I plan on taking from it and moving forward with. So with that being said, we are really out of time. So I'm going to throw back over to old boy for a really quick shout out, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah, thank you, James. I hope everybody can learn a lesson from this. I'm not going to speak on the other stuff because I was born in Pennsylvania. So I was on the northern side of this. So honestly, I understand where James is coming from. I understand where other people come from. But like I said, this is the point, that we need to get over this stuff. Hopefully one day we do. But on that point, I want to thank everybody on ParaX. Thank everybody that watches the YouTube channels when we're, if you don't watch it on ParaX. Remember to subscribe to James Hershey's page. We have merchandise. You guys want it. We're going to try to put that on a page soon on YouTube. I hope you guys watch it. I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Misfits, Sugar Lady, Monster Lovers, and Demon Hunters, I love you. Have a great night, and blessed be.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on the radio, thank you for listening. I appreciate you guys so much. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I hope that you learned something that you didn't know. Because most people have never heard of this incident. They never heard of a situation where an entire town went to war with itself and burnt a large section of it. To me, that blows my mind that nobody knew about this. But it's not taught in school. There's so many different stories like this that aren't taught in school of amazing things that have happened. Some tragic like this and some amazing that just literally were never taught in schools. And in the future, I'd like to do more shows where we talk about some of those amazing things. I think that would be fun. But thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your support. And until we speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.